If you're new to the channel, then welcome, and if you're returning to the channel, then welcome back. I just want to give a quick thank you to you for tuning in. So today on the channel, I want to talk about something that I've made a special point to avoid actually talking about, and that's stimulus updates. Now, this is mainly for two reasons. Number one is that if you want any kind of stimulus updates, the only channel that anyone should be watching is Meet Kevin. I mean, that guy's a machine. He pumps out, 5-6 videos a day, half of which are going to be stimulus updates from morning, afternoon, and into the evening. And frankly, when it comes to stimulus news or updates, that's the channel that I'm watching to stay up to date. The second reason that I avoided talking about stimulus on this channel was because I didn't want to talk about it until we knew that something was actually going to get passed. But frankly, at this point, when it comes to a second stimulus bill, I really don't think that we're going to actually get a second stimulus bill. Okay, wow, very rude intro. Don't cut me off like that. What I was trying to say was that I don't think that we're going to get a second stimulus bill passed until after the election, which brings us to today's video. Okay, so let's just kind of start at the beginning with this whole stimulus timeline. Well, the United States got down with the sickness somewhere in January, I would say late January. By February, the government was taking notice and actually, performing some actions. Then we got an actual stimulus bill passed at the end of March. And by April and May, we were actually seeing money going into people's accounts or getting increased unemployment benefits. And basically, ever since that first stimulus bill got passed and money started going out, the talks of requiring a second stimulus bill to keep the economy afloat and keep the US people afloat was right on the heels of the first bill. I mean, we've been talking about it pretty much since the beginning, which means that it's been almost 6 months at this point and no second stimulus bill has been passed. Now, if you've been doing any reading and you believe what the Fed says, you know that some of their top researchers are saying that we will need a second stimulus bill to keep the US economy afloat. And if you look at this article and you believe what the top 156 economists say, you'll also see that their research indicates we will need a second stimulus bill. Now, I included this article because when I actually read it and you look into it, the top 156 economists are just like some economy professors or economy majors in a college. I don't know why that makes them the top 156, but all that aside, all of the research data aside, just looking at the ground level, it does seem like people are going to require some help if we're going to continue to make economic improvements over the course of this pandemic. I mean, people are getting laid off, they're losing their jobs, they're getting furloughed, they're getting reduced pay. We're seeing a lot of industries take some heavy hits, even though, the stock market would indicate that the economy is doing good. Still, it's clear many people are hurting. I mean, Disney plans on laying off like 20,000 employees. Between United Airlines and American Airlines, we're looking at somewhere around 30,000 workers being furloughed. Hotels, movie theaters, most of the service industry is really having a hard time keeping up with, operating a business. And so on that low end, the low-hanging fruit of providing money and stimulus to people and to businesses, especially small businesses, it seems like, a second stimulus bill might actually help some of these people and industries that are hurting. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. And on top of that, if the government was really interested and keen on keeping the economy alive and keeping the US people, floating by during this pandemic time, then you would think that, handing out some extra money for actual stimulus, meaning giving extra money to people who are already fortunate enough to have a job and continue making money because they can work at home during the pandemic, then they have the opportunity to spend that money in their local economies. Now, of course, this actually assumes that people are going to do that with the money. There's no guarantee of that, but at least it's there as an option. So with all of these factors going on, all of this research, and just knowing what's going on at the ground level, why has it still been 6 months with no second stimulus bill being passed? Well, in my opinion, the number one reason for that is politics. The very first obvious factor in this political game is something that I'm calling taking the credit and the blame game. Whether it's actually a good idea to have a second stimulus passed, it doesn't really matter at this point because I think, for the most part, the American people, the voters have spoken, they want a second stimulus. And what this allows is both parties to have the opportunity to get their version of a stimulus bill passed, for which they get to take credit for fighting for the American people and, being the champions that helped the American people recover from this pandemic recession. And this is especially important because we're in the middle of an election year, and on top of that, it's the presidential election year. So one party or the other party getting the opportunity to get a bill passed and taking credit for it really gives, one party or the other a big boost in terms of currying favor with the voters. And this is very obvious if you look at how much back and forth has been going on between the two political parties, and still we've seen almost no progress over the last 6 months. The Republicans and the Democrats can't come to an agreement because one side doesn't want to help enough people and they want to spend too little money, and the other side wants to spend too much money and is, helping people and giving money to places and organizations and industries that don't need it. At least that's what they're telling themselves, and that's what they're telling us. For example, a tweet that the president tweeted out 2 weeks ago saying that he was calling off all stimulus talks until his re-election, at which point he would pass a bill for $1,200 going to the people in the form of stimulus checks, helping out airline industry, and helping out small businesses. This was because he said Nancy Pelosi was negotiating in bad faith and her versions of the bills were just too expensive. Now, of course, this is really just him trying to, force the Democrats to accept some kind of Republican drafted bill. That way his party can take credit for getting a bill passed that actually helps the American people. And we know that because, within the same day, he ended up tweeting that he would still be down to get a small stimulus bill passed, which was immediate $1,200. But again, that's my point. It's all just political posturing. Meanwhile, the people that actually need the help on the ground level have to just sit there and listen to all of this nonsense and be caught in the crossfire of all of it. And I am mentioning Trump and kind of singling him out here as an example, but it's not like the Democratic Party has been an innocent party in all of this either. I mean, there's obviously no way that they would want to accept a Republican drafted bill because that would essentially be handing over the credit, the win, to the Republicans, saying that they were the ones that drafted a bill that got passed. On top of that, both parties were, very willing to go on their recess without passing anything, which just indicates to me that they're really not interested in helping the American people. To me, if they really cared about the people, they would do something very simple, like taking the most effective parts out of the first stimulus bill that got passed and just passing that as a small package to get things going for the actual people who need the help. Then once a simple bill like that was passed, they could be left to argue amongst themselves on what's lingering. They could figure out if they need to bail out more corporations or if they need to give money to the US Patent Office or federal prisons, but at least the people on the ground level are getting the help. If they really cared, they would make it about the people first. But with all of that said, I don't think we're necessarily doomed. I do still think that we're going to see a second stimulus bill passed. It just won't be until after the election. And this is why. I mean, like I mentioned before, there's a pretty significant amount of research that's gone into this, indicating that the long-term effects of the pandemic could be, an even worsening recession. And I think that we, ultimately will need second stimulus. The government knows that as well. There's people in Trump's ear and in Biden's ear, and that's even, a part of both of their campaigns as far as running for president. Another big thing is that there's still a lot of uncertainty about how long the pandemic will last. I mean, I think I just saw an article a couple of days ago saying that cases are back on the rise in the United States. On top of that, something we talked about last week was just look at the stock market and the way it immediately rebounded. I mean, I really feel like we haven't seen the long-term effects of what kind of impact that the pandemic is going to have on the actual stock market and the economy as a whole. So I would say from a practical standpoint, we will have to see another stimulus bill passed at some point. But in the meantime, until the election results come in, the government, the political parties are just going to continue to string us along and tell us that yes, it's coming, and yes, we're trying to get it done by certain deadlines, which they always go over. But yes, we will see another stimulus bill, in my opinion, because ultimately what it comes down to is that both sides are just holding out for the election. I mean, if Trump gets reelected, I definitely think he'll pass a second stimulus bill. There are people in the government who want this to happen. Not everyone is purely evil. And I do think that he would want to, boost his approval ratings, especially immediately going into office, start off on a good note, and curry favor with the American people. I also wouldn't be surprised, based on his personality, that if he actually did get reelected, that he would look at as getting a stimulus bill passed as a reward to the American people for voting him back into office. And if Biden were to get elected, it's very obvious that a second stimulus bill would get passed. I mean, that's a major portion of what, him and Kamala Harris's campaign is campaigning for. And for whether Trump or Biden was elected, even if the House of Representatives and the Senate was the opposite political party than the president, I don't think he would see much resistance, because at that point the battle is already over. Whoever won the seat for the president. So now, thinking about if a bill gets passed after the election, where does that put us at timeline-wise? Well, the president takes office January 20th of the following year that he's been elected, so we would be looking at January 20th, 2021. I could see like another month of, ironing out details or bickering back and forth, whatever might be the case, which puts us in late February, something getting passed, and seeing money probably in like March or April. And this is actually kind of interesting because I was curious about how many stimulus bills got passed during the 2008 economic recession, and there were 2 stimulus bills passed. One was in February 2008, and the second was in February 2009, which meant that the bills were passed exactly 1 year apart from each other. Which, if we got a second stimulus bill following the election, based on the timeline that I've just kind of made up, it would be almost exactly 1 year between the 2 stimulus bills. So, maybe from like a precedent standpoint, yeah, we will see a second stimulus bill 1 year after the initial stimulus bill. And on top of that, it was also during an election year because President Bush was the first one to pass the stimulus bill in 2008, and former President Obama was the person to pass the second stimulus bill in 2009. So just kind of like, I don't know, weird relationship there, weird correlation. But anyway, that's where I think we're at ultimately when it comes to the talks of stimulus and stimulus bills and stimulus checks and just stimulus in general. And just remember that that's all this is. They're just my thoughts and my analysis based on what I've been seeing and reading and paying attention to. I mean, I could be totally wrong. Maybe we'll get a stimulus bill passed tomorrow, or I could be completely wrong in the other direction and maybe we'll never see another stimulus bill. But let's just, hope for the best. In the meantime, I'm going to continue watching Meet Kevin videos to stay up to date, and when the election time comes around, I'll just be, sitting back eating my popcorn. Comment down below because I'm curious what other people think. These are just my thoughts, like I said. Tell me if I'm completely wrong. Tell me if I'm on the right track. Maybe there's some other angles that I haven't thought about or am completely overlooking. I mean, I'm sure that's the case. Also, subscribe if you like economic and finance content. I think I want to continue talking about some of the news and things like that I like to read. I also want to continue giving tips as well when it comes to personal finance, but there's just a lot of interesting topics out there, and there's a lot of good conversations that are being had, especially on YouTube. But anyway, we'll get to all of that next time. And I'll see you all next time.